Hello and welcome. This is the second chapter of a log summarizing the activities of a bobcat family that moved into my yard for a brief period in April and May of 2024. On or around April 22nd, Avery moved her two male kittens into a tight space behind a rainwater harvesting cistern in my side yard. As summarized in the last video, the first evidence I have of kittens is May 3rd when Avery calls to them and they respond. Up to this point, I've prepped my yard to minimize traffic as much as possible around the cistern so Avery can raise her kittens in a safe and peaceful environment. One thing I noticed is that she's having to take quite a leap to get behind the cistern. So I removed tools from the side of my shed so that she might have easier access to her kittens. After a couple days, I noticed things have been very quiet with no sign of Avery or the kittens. I'm curious as to whether they've already moved on, so after filling her water dish, I'd take a quick peek at the side of my cistern. I immediately hear a quiet growl telling me Avery is still around, so I back off immediately, showing her and her kittens their due respect. After this brief encounter, I was concerned I might have blown it and Avery would move on, realizing her new home had been discovered. Later that morning, Avery drops down from the top of the cistern to take a drink and morning stretch. She seems fairly relaxed, so it doesn't seem like our encounter has caused undue stress. That evening, I observe her exploring the area where I removed the garden tools. She realizes this is an easier way to get to her kittens and takes advantage of the same. On May 9th, I suspect she smells a rodent in the adjacent shed and can see her investigating under the door. This is the reason I don't use poisons for rodent removal, since poison prey is easily captured by apex predators like bobcats. In Avery's case, I certainly don't want poisons making their way into her milk and the kittens. I do have a no-harm rodent trap, but I'm hoping Avery will take care of that visitor naturally since they can be rather destructive. Over the next 2 days, I can see her regularly checking around the cistern, almost as if to ensure that the kittens will be safe before she exits on her hunt. Around this time, I'm getting over a bad cold and Avery can hear me coughing through an adjacent open window. She looks, but doesn't really seem to be very bothered. On May 12th, I captured my first video of Avery emerging from the side of my cistern. About a half hour later, she drops back in. Notice you can hear the kittens calling Mom when she approaches. Over the next couple of days, I observed multiple exits and returns to her den. More importantly, I noticed she doesn't spend nearly as much time surveying around the cistern. I'm assuming she feels a little more comfortable coming and going. And I think this might be in part to me approaching my waste bins located on the side of the yard from the front of my house so as to not disturb her domain. Although I do regularly visit the area to fill her dish with water. Some may consider my providing water unnecessary or unnatural for an animal that lived in the desert before my home was built. However, I've observed her drinking from bird baths, fountains, and my neighbor's pool many times. In this regard, I consider harvested rainwater a welcome alternative to chlorinated or contaminated water sources that were not part of her original environment. Considering how much she drinks every day while nursing, I'm happy to help. On May 15th, my family decides to have dinner on our back patio, which is out of sight of the cistern. While having dinner, my son sees Avery hanging out on a corner wall farthest away from us. She's just hanging out and watching us and seems totally relaxed. After dinner, we come inside and soon she walks towards the picnic bench and starts grooming herself in front of the window. A little later, she checks in on the kittens. I captured footage of her looking up into a tombstone rose where she appears to be searching for nesting or sleeping birds. It's not surprising that most birds have left my yard during her brief residence and probably don't appreciate having to share a place where they're usually welcomed by bird baths and bird feeders. It's interesting to observe that birds can also make things uncomfortable for Avery, since later that morning I see her approaching the cistern when suddenly an owl drops directly above her, trying to frighten her away by snapping its wings. The wind blows a screen that's been stored on the side of my cistern for the past few months. This creates greater exposure for her kittens, which would otherwise be difficult to spot behind the screen. During the morning of May 17th, I see her in the side yard and hear what appears to be another kitten. I'm hopeful the kittens have finally emerged from the cistern and I'll be able to get a closer look. In the video, I observe she walks over out of frame and the kitten sounds stop. To my surprise, I see her a minute later walking with a second smaller bobcat to the cistern, so the sounds obviously came from that second cat. The new bobcat is a male that starts exploring around the cistern before getting a snarl and a slight growl from Avery. The male eases up and Avery eventually lets it look in the direction behind the cistern where the screen has fallen away. The male doesn't get too close and eventually walks away out of frame. A few minutes later, Avery appears to be watching the male up on the wall where she normally drops in behind the cistern. A few minutes after that, she stretches and walks out of frame. She comes back, takes a drink, walks by the down screen, and grooms. Of course, this was extraordinary to witness since my understanding is males may be deadly to bobcat kittens. I'm wondering if the smaller male is one of Avery's kittens from last year, or perhaps its dad checking in on the kids. I share details with Gail Sherman, a friend and volunteer with bobcats in Tucson, as to whether this bobcat is related to Avery. Through careful observations of markings on the bobcat's cheeks and right leg, Gail believes this is in fact one of Avery's kittens from last year, raised behind the very same cistern. Here's a clip of last year's kittens. I couldn't tell you which one of the two males is the associated bobcat, but you can see how much they've grown in 1 year. I decided to replace the screen given the presence of other bobcats in the area that might threaten the kittens, concluding it's best to restore things the way they were when Avery originally moved in. Finally, May 20th was the day. After close to a month of logging Avery's activities in the backyard, I came home from class at about 1:30 in the afternoon to be pleasantly surprised by kittens playing in the southwest corner of my yard. I quickly checked one of my wildlife cameras over Wi-Fi, which had captured the moment that they first emerged. Here's the clip showing them walking awkwardly towards my backyard in their new home. They played for a couple of hours, exploring the yard and trying to climb the pallets, leaning up on mine and my neighbor's common wall. The pallets are placed there as a heat break for the adjacent plants given their exposure during the summer. After a couple of hours of playing, the family takes a nap under my neighbor's willow. The family woke up at about 6:30 p.m. with the kittens carefully exploring the yard while Mom stayed close. They explored about as far as the monk's pepper directly in line with my bedroom window. It's at this moment that I realize these pallets need to be removed to keep kittens from climbing into my neighbor's yard. Out of respect for my neighbors, I realized that might realize tension and would certainly trigger Avery to hunt for a new secure location. It's an oversight and something I'll have to spend some time making right when everybody's put away. In my next video, I'll share adventures in trying to move those pallets without disturbing the family. I'll also share close-up videos of kittens playing on my backyard couch, located right next to my back sliding glass door, resulting in some adorable and laugh-out-loud moments. If you enjoyed this video and would like to track the family's final week in my yard, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing for updates. See you next time.